thank you all for sticking around for our final keynote panel this morning, or well, this afternoon now. We've got a great one rounding off our keynotes here. Before we kick off, I'd just like to thank all of our sponsors again, but especially our diamond sponsors, Bankai, Deutsche Telekom, STC, Telefonica Global Solutions, and Verizon, who really make all of this possible. We've got a great keynote panel here looking at how we're delivering a ubiquitous cloud experience for end users, which is being led by Sam Evans, a partner with Delta Partners. Over to you, Sam.
Brilliant. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome along to this session at ITW today. We're going to be talking about how we're delivering a ubiquitous cloud experience. Sounds simple. I think it's a lot more complex in reality. I'm thrilled that Stefan, Andrew, Jim, and Eric are here to talk about it with us today. And I think maybe, Stefan, let me start with you. What is a ubiquitous cloud experience? Before we go any further to see how we deliver it, what is a ubiquitous cloud experience?
Yeah, it's a big question maybe, right? But for me, it's definitely the fact that you have it available everywhere at any time and in any shape and form, which of course then is not just about the actual access to the cloud in itself in an enterprise play, but it's also very much in terms of the drive in the consumerism, I would say, in terms of how people are used as a consumer to be able to consume whatever they want at any place in time. When you're in the work environment, your expectations are the same, whether you're sitting at home or in the office location, and that needs to be seamless, complete experience essentially for everyone. When we reach that, then I think we have it in ubiquitous terms.
Okay. And Andrew, I mean, is this an enterprise push towards customers demanding a ubiquitous cloud experience, or is it being driven by content providers who are saying, look, we want to get our content on any device at any time into the consumer hands?
I think it's a combination of both. I think from the enterprise side, we're seeing really the consumer requirements play out in the enterprise market, as Stefan just mentioned. So people want to use data and get access to applications, resources, entertainment, and they want to be able to consume that from wherever, however, whenever they want. But then I think you've got the content providers making available very powerful resources, application services, which the enterprise client wants to get hold of to enable their business to become more efficient, faster, so on and so forth. And I would also say one size doesn't fit all. I think we're seeing some organizations can quickly adopt and be agile and move forward with these applications which are cloud driven. Others, and we'll talk about it later, really don't have the processes or the tools to do that as yet.
And Jim, from your perspective of Equinix, right? You are data centers primarily, storing data in fixed locations. What does the concept of ubiquitous cloud experience mean for a business like yours?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And there's really kind of three concepts architecturally that drive what we do with enterprise customers in the data center environment. One is, the concept of hybrid, which simply says that, for most sophisticated multinational enterprises, they do not send everything to the cloud. There's some portion of their IT infrastructure that stays private. However, that private infrastructure has the penchant for wanting to directly interconnect to the public resources. So that's, number one. Number two is really multi-cloud, right? Nobody uses one cloud. Nobody likes vendor lock-in and dealing, whether it's one network provider or one cloud provider. In fact, I think the last report I read said, every year the average number of clouds that the enterprise uses goes up from 3 to 4. SaaS companies, it's in the hundreds that are being consumed today. So that would be really the second thing. And then the third thing architecturally is what we now refer to, I think, as edge, which I joke is the most misused word in the English language currently. But really what that means is simply the distribution of those IT assets, whether it's a public asset or a private asset, close in proximity to the user of those assets, which really gets down to a quality of experience. And that's really what drives our interaction with our customers around what they're trying to accomplish in cloud.
So just before we go further, explain, why is edge the most misused term in the English language right now? Where are we all going wrong?
Well, I don't think it's so much that it's one of those things that's in evolution, right? And I think some of the early assumptions around edge, that it was something completely different than what already existed. And the reality is there are a lot of places, venues that you can put infrastructure to be closer to end users that don't require you to go out and say build 3,000 small data centers that you got to go find funding for. There's plenty of assets out there in the world today that get workloads closer to end users. So I look at this more as an evolution, not a revolution, but depends on who you talk to.
Okay, very good. So, Eric, we talk about this concept of ubiquitous cloud experience. In the industry, we say, well, everybody wants a ubiquitous cloud experience. Are we there yet, that all customers are coming and knocking on your door saying, we want this, any device to any device, any endpoint to any endpoint, real-time access to content? Or is it only a subset of customers, or are we still some way away from that?
Yeah, I mean, I really don't think we're there yet. And to your point on Edge, when we had Frank Cittadano come from QoS when we acquired them, I told him what I thought Edge was, and he wasn't quite sure what it was, but I was wrong, right? and I think what we see now is the way that cloud adoption has happened. One, great for everybody on this panel that we're getting to have this conversation about the ubiquitous cloud. Ubiquitous cloud means ubiquitous access, which means growth for all of us. But I think where we aren't quite yet is, the requirements for that cloud experience aren't, they're probably advanced from where the networks that sit behind it sit right now. Customers want to be able to work from anywhere, access any cloud environment very quickly, have data sovereignty, be able to touch multi-cloud, have it all be incredibly secure, have it be scalable, flexible, and they also would not like to give all of the capital to make that happen overnight, right? And so I think as the partnership ecosystem comes together, we have to define that a little bit, and we have to be able to say, hey, if you are this type of customer, these are the type of programs that you can participate in a cloud environment as part of. Because if we try to design a truly ubiquitous cloud environment for every customer segment in every region, the amount of capital that would have to go into the ground to make that possible, the amount of automation that we would have to catch up with probably isn't there yet. So I speak probably for Zayo where we say we want to focus on building the network that underpins that and managing the edge where we see the most growth, and then trying to inform that conversation going forward. Okay,
makes sense. Still some way to go. Andrew, if I may come to you. Colt has been one of the carriers at the forefront with on-demand. Have you seen that you've sort of built on-demand and the customers have come? Because that's probably an example of a ubiquitous cloud experience you can spin up on-demand networking. Or are you seeing that there are still barriers for adoption of that at this stage?
Good question. Yeah, I think so. Our sort of approach has been threefold. One is to build the network out to all of the data centers, something like 1,000 data centers on net now. Second, then to make sure we have access to the content. So 225 CSPs on that. And then our view was we overlay that with on-demand, make it agile, make it such that the consumer can access those resources through a portal, through software. And I would say it is use case and customer driven. Not the whole market hasn't moved to, I want everything to be on demand and to be turned up, instantiated immediately. You're seeing some customers that want that. They want that predictability, they want that service, they want agility. What gets in the way is some other organizations still have a very traditional procurement process. They have a procurement manager who needs to get POs signed off, he or she. There's a budget that has to be approved each month, and therefore that really restricts this ability to drive to on-demand. So we have to get involved in working with those teams to educate them in terms of the efficiency, the cost benefit of moving to more of an on-demand model. So it's the product set is growing very rapidly. It's one of our fastest growth ones, but you have to reflect what the customer requirements are at that time.
And what have been the use cases that have been driving it? When customers are coming into on-demand, are there specific use cases for them that more naturally sit in on-demand?
I was with one of these clients 2 weeks ago in London, and they are an information service provider. They access revenue as soon as they turn up the service. So all their ports are going out via on-demand because they can turn up that content more quickly. I would say clearly access to data center resources, We see that with the reseller markets when they want to turn up services quickly. And then I would say we're seeing quite a lot of activity around when it's a collaboration platform, and you want to get those teams up and running quickly and get that get those teams brought together and those groups stood up quickly.
And Stefan, are you seeing any barriers for adoption here? Things that are slowing your progress down as you move towards that any point to any point real-time connectivity?
No, I think you have to look at it on a different layers of the network domain as well. If I look at the internet domain that we're providing on a large scale, that is very on-demand kind of oriented in its way that we deliver that service, and that's also where you see the consumer play really come in that sense, that is consuming what they need and when they need it. If we then transition over to more enterprise like services, it also embeds very rapidly, of course, with trust and security as well in that domain, because it's all about the enterprise's data that you in one way or another want to make sure that you can make available for your employees and potential partners and other things. But that also does require a lot of security aspects and a lot of features, and we have to have a little bit of understanding, I think, as a whole, that's a big transition for the enterprises, IT departments, and the way that they've structured the workloads that they have internally within their own companies. And I think that requires time. I think it's that simple, right? It's not, everything is not going to move out that rapidly, but you can still work on how you make the access to the information more streamlined and ubiquitous in that case, right? But actually transitioning that part, it requires a lot of security and a lot of functionality around that as well, which I think is extremely important.
Yeah, so beyond capacity, latency, it's security. I think that's clear. Erica, what are you seeing? So just beyond the speed of the network, the latency, the amount of capacity you can move around, what else are customers asking for as we move towards what they call here the cloud experience?
Yeah, well, I think, and I probably would say if we have enterprise audience members, it's probably a very small percentage, right? And so I think some of the barriers we've created on our own to some extent, right? Like we've all said on this panel that this ubiquitous cloud experience needs to be there. So the first question: who gets to make money, right? How what at each level of the stack, who's going to pay? How much should the hyperscalers pay for? How much do the data centers pay for? How much should all of our investors reap benefit from this? And our customers, I think, in the enterprise are sitting at the end and saying, we need this to exist. And a lot of the business cases that run up are saying, okay, great, if you can capture a certain percentage of that future demand, these are all going to be really good investments. But I think we've stepped on our toes a little bit within the industry as we start to build this and deliver this, and defining where each of the partners, on this panel, where we're going to play in that stack and how we're going to, deliver our part of that connected experience is going to result in a better end user experience in the end. Because if we all kind of sprint forward and try to build this on our own without collaboration, we're going to run, the industry will run out of capital before we ever deliver that. And then customers, it'll be too late for them to figure out how to get the network they actually want built.
And let's talk about the sustainability of economics then, because the industry is delayering somewhat, but all layers remain critical, as you said. There is a big question of where the value will reside or how the value will be split. What needs to be done to ensure that economics are sustainable for all players in the ecosystem? Because it's not there yet necessarily. What needs to happen differently, Eric, in that?
Well, I can tell you firsthand where our investors think the value should sit. But as we compete in the market, I think we have to be a little bit better at partnering. And I see elements of where we're getting there, and I see large announcements in markets where we are buying from each other and selling from each other. I think a lot of the work that Equinix has done in their portal, making it easy for network providers to figure out where to place bets. I think that's all moving in the right direction. And then I think customers will they'll vote with their wallets, and they'll see the customer experience they get, and that will naturally inform, I think, where we all need to sit. I mean, Zayo's historical focus has been as an infrastructure player. With QoS, we got into the edge, but we're not looking to go add 20 more products. That isn't the model that we've seen successful. We need other partners to provide connectivity where we don't have it, provide services where we don't want to, and then ultimately agree that a good customer experience is good for everybody.
Jim, you're nodding, but you sit on sort of the other side of the industry. If we will simplify it to that two-sided construct, how do you see the economics going forward between, from the data center perspective, looking at the hyperscalers and the customers and the enterprise, but also the connectivity providers?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to some of the things I started with talking about, sort of, multi-cloud and hybrid and multi-network. This idea that, the enterprise community essentially wants to pick the parts of digital infrastructure that they need for their use case and their economics and their environment. And, individually, we all sort of, deal with a piece of that as a data center company. If you're inside of the data center or inside of the data center platform, things tend to be, relatively easy to do and straightforward. However, some of the biggest questions we get from customers are, well, how do I connect to these clouds? Or, who are the fiber providers in this particular metro who can service directly into these buildings? And certainly, we as a company are not interested in being in the local fiber access business. To the extent that we do some, long haul services on our fabric network, that's more as a convenience. Most of what happens when a customer comes into our environment is, to your point, Eric, they look at a portal and they can look at every cloud provider, every network provider, every MSP that coexists in that metro with them. So, from our perspective, this is not a, hey, we're going to steal from Peter to pay Paul or steal from the network guy to pay the data center guy. It's really around how do we make that sort of discoverability and ease of consumption on, what I think of as kind of the private infrastructure side. I think Stefan used a good example of, hey, if you're on the internet side of the equation, it's point, click, and instant gratification, but there's no SLA. What if we could get the private side, deterministic network services like Ethernet and MPLS, private connectivity into cloud environments and into private cloud environments. If we could make that as easy to do as what happens on the public side, then there's more than enough money to go around for everybody.
Would you agree, Stefan? More than enough money to go around for everybody.
What's enough? Right. That's no, but I think it's I think there is enough money to go around in that context. But I think it's also very important that we recognize that this is it is a full ecosystem that has different players on different layers of that ecosystem. And I think in many ways it's very important, and that's what we live by to a great extent, is to really focus on what we're good at and servicing that piece of it. And I think that that's very important. If you do that, I definitely think that there is enough to go around. I think it's when you're straying away a little bit, then you have a challenge. But I guess also this is still evolving, right? And on a daily basis, I would surely say that it's not enough, but for sure, right? I mean, there are opportunities out there, and we'll all, I think, around the tables here are definitely continuously focusing on excelling in that piece of the ecosystem where we're readily available.
But let me pick up on that one piece of the ecosystem. We've been having conversations at the GLF board within the Digital Infra Leaders Forum about, is the future a single asset class future, i.e. you do fiber and only fiber and data centers and only data centers, or is it going to be in search of this experience for end users? Is the future going to be multi-asset class infrastructure providers? So it's going to be fiber plus data centers. How do you see it evolving going forwards?
Well, I believe more in the connectivity layers. I wouldn't just put it into the fiber, but everything that goes around that, actually bringing then the user of the content back into where it's actually stored, whether it's stored in an Equinix location or in a private data center in that context. So I don't necessarily think that it would be multi-asset in that way. I don't think that's the niche and the relentless focus that you need to have to excel in a specific part of it. So it may appear, but I don't think necessarily that's the direction that I see will happen over time.
So more of a single, you're at the connectivity layer, keeping separate from storage.
Yeah, and then you really utilize and work within that ecosystem and partner much more broadly than I think a lot of us do today. And I think we're sitting here talking about the cloud and the connectivity from that layer. We also have to realize that there are a lot of functionalities around just being a user in that case and securely access that content, the content players themselves and the development that they're doing there. So the ecosystem is already pretty broad, and I would say that they're very focused on the different activities in that, but I think it can definitely come together in better partnerships over time as well.
So I'm going to continue on the partnerships theme, and Andrew, I'm going to press you a bit on this, because we always say as an industry, we need partnerships. We should be better partners. Partnerships will fix everything, right? When it's too hard to buy someone and we're not sure we can build it internally, we go partnerships. Can you expand on the types of partnerships that are required and what is actually required to make the partnerships work in this space?
Yeah, okay. And I think I'll also pick up on that, your discussion around delayering. Because delayering doesn't necessarily mean you have to separate the company out. It's also about having focus within the organization. So I'll answer it from a focus perspective, the partnering. So we have built a more focused enterprise business. We've done some changes within our, we call it traditional wholesale carrier business. And then we've built a new hyperscaler business. And each of those parts of our go-to-market model require a different approach, different skill set, different way of thinking about CapEx within the business. Now, getting to partnerships, the partnerships play out differently in those layers. So in the enterprise space, the partnerships will be around how do we bring more capability to the enterprise to be relevant and valuable to them. Stefan mentioned security earlier. So how do we partner with a security provider, big one with a Z that we're working with, and how do we build that into our offer? How do we work with a technology vendor so that we can provide both the underlay and the overlay SD-WAN technology? So there we're sort of, if you will, productizing the partnership capability. In the carrier space, that's all around how do we make our services much more easier to consume so our partners can use them through an API, through a portal, making it on demand, so we're frictionless in terms of the capability. And then really in the infrastructure space, as this panel has mentioned, we do not all have enough CapEx to build everywhere we want to. So we work with partners around, we have a set of assets that we'll use. Can we work with them to use their assets to bring that total service back to the client? So hopefully that answers that.
It answers the first part. In the second part, how do you become good partners?
Okay.
Right? Because we see the need, and I think you've explained it incredibly well for where partners can fit in. But how do you ensure you really drive value from those partnerships that work for both sides?
Yeah, and I wouldn't say we are perfect at this yet. We in Colt, we have stood up a new team. It's a change we made over the last couple of years as a VP team, which has focused purely on building partnerships. So that's quite a big unit and a set of resources. But essentially, we look for complementarity in terms of the service set or the geography. We look at making sure that it brings value to the partner as well as value to us. And then we are tending to go down a path of, do we have a common vision around APIs and software and making that service experience seamless for the end client?
Okay, and Jim, from the other side, are carriers there yet with being what you define as good partners, or do they still have a way to go?
No, I mean, our entire business, saying to both sides over here, our entire business is predicated on the fact that, we help aggregate demand for the network operator, right? And, in the beginning, that started off as simply as saying, hey, if you were provisioning something inside of our data center environment, we could run a data center in 24 hours. And, 20 years ago, that was novel, right? Because people were used to waiting weeks to get delivery for something. So we benefited and the operator benefited from that dynamic. Fast forward to today, and now, we have things like our Fabric service, which, started off as a way of aggregating private network connectivity into public cloud, but then has recently been, turned into pretty much an any-to-any interdomain sort of environment, so that if you want to get access to your Colt network and you happen to be in an Equinix data center buying cloud services through our Fabric, you can reach Colt's network, all using the same API and the same automation. So, that allows for ubiquity and scale across the industry when you think of, the fact that we're operating in 71 cities around the world with any number of operators to work together to provide that value back to the customer.
And in this, so let's talk about partnerships. Eric, I'm going to come back to you, right? how are you rethinking partnerships or looking forward? Cost of capital is increasing. Your ability to or appetite for organic investment may be changing. Is that making partnerships even more critical for you? Are you sitting internally thinking, actually, look, we have to take a partner route because CapEx isn't as low cost as it was?
Yeah, well, I kind of put partnerships in three categories. First is you got invited to a meeting at ITW and you don't really know what they do and you haven't figured out how you work together, but you're going to call it a partnership to avoid that hard conversation. The second are the conversations we have with competitors. When I say partnership, I mean I would like to beat you so much, but if I can't, I will buy from you, and that's how I will give my end service to a customer. And then kind of the third category is where you can sit down and you can say, what we agree on what the customer experience should be. We agree that buying cloud should be as easy as buying network or buying data center space. What we do together, we do things that are different, and together it makes more sense to do it than each of us try to figure it out. And so I think as we lean into partnerships going forward, we're always going to have a mix of the first two, right? And that's just part of the industry, part of what makes it fun. But then that third segment of where we can decide we need the customer experience to be easier. We don't want to build what you have. You don't want to spend the capital on the asset we have. How can we put this together in a way that the customer doesn't realize everything that happened on the back end? And I think the best measure of a good partnership is if your sales increase, do my sales increase, and then vice versa. If you've checked that box, you've got a partnership.
And do you think, as this plays out towards, again, the vision that's set up here, ubiquitous cloud experience, does there need to be consolidation in the industry, Eric? Would you expect the connectivity layer or the data center layer consolidation, or do you see your peers, I won't put you on the spot for Zayo, but your peers going through M&A sprees to try and use partnerships in the short term, but onboard the capability longer term?
Yeah, I mean, I think we see we see consolidation as probably one element of where you can't find the option number 3 and you have a lot of option number 2 conversations and you're going to have a capital race to the bottom. Makes a ton of sense to consolidate across that industry, and I think we will see that. I think our customers are going to benefit as that consolidation occurs, and it's also going to put the right assets with the right investors, and that's going to make the future better for everybody.
Yeah, you're nodding, Jim. Do you take the same view as the data center layer? Will we see consolidation, even though the data center footprint is going to expand massively into beyond tier 2 into tier 3 cities?
Yep.
Availability zones.
I mean, on the one hand, you have good tailwinds in the form of, whether it's the sprawl of edge or just the continued migration to cloud services. So that's obviously a good thing. However, it's really hard to argue that, we went through a decade of 0 to negative interest rates and, you could raise capital and go build all the data centers and trench all the fiber that you wanted. And now all of a sudden we're back to 5 to 7% in most developed countries. And, although that's shocking to us in the short term, in the long term, that's kind of about average, right? And so there's got to be, a certain amount of froth that got introduced into the system just because of the, sort of availability of cheap capital. And, I think that's probably the first area that you're going to start to see consolidation, is just because, people were making, what they thought was an easy bet, and it's not easy anymore, right?
And on the data center side, as you're going through this, we were speaking in the Digital Infra Leaders Forum a couple of weeks ago. The view from your peers was we're coming out of a period of sort of quasi-unconstrained growth into an era of efficiency. And going forward, efficiency will win rather than speed of growth. Would you subscribe to that? Is it a change of model for the data center provider?
Well, I think the thing that we tend to point to is that, when people say data centers, they just think, the industry is all one thing. And it's not, right? There's really, and you can argue how many layers of the data center industry there is, but I'll just break it down to the simplest, which is, there are wholesalers, people who build turnkey solutions for hyperscalers. You hand them the keys and you walk away for 20 years and you're done. And then you have more of a retail entity, which is really what Equinix does. And, part of that retail experience is that hybrid multi-cloud, multi-network experience. So, we tend to look at the role that we play in the infrastructure as This is, the cost you pay to play, right? We don't have a lot of variable usage in our environment. We are sort of the airport in the airline system. We're the train station in the train system. Yes, the usage of the trains and the airplanes could vary on a given day, but the airport and the train station doesn't shrink, right? It doesn't get bigger or smaller on any given day. So for us, because of where we sit in the industry, we see continued demand. We don't see quite the same thing, I think, that the pure wholesalers see, where they're more vulnerable to the usage-based aspect of their customers.
So we've spoken about partnerships. We've spoken about industry consolidation to meet the changing requirements. Stefan, let me come to you. How urgent is this? So we speak a lot about, did COVID accelerate, did COVID change dynamics of traffic? How urgent is it that we move forward to this sort of ubiquitous cloud experience? Is it a burning platform that if you're not offering it now, you're going to fall behind, or is there a couple of years to get there? And what do you think will be driving that?
Let's see if I can come up with a good answer to that. It's a complex question, but but I don't think it's a burning issue in that sense. I think it's just a natural, gradual evolution of what we're seeing. It had started way earlier than when COVID hit us. That's, what is it now, 3 years ago, right? But of course, it really accelerated during that time period because of the changes in our work environment, the fact that we moved home, we started working in a different way than what we used to do, and that's definitely here to stay. But I think also the vast majority of the organizations really adapted to that very quickly in accommodating the fact that people could actually work in a different manner. So we are on that trajectory. I don't think it's like a burning issue that needs to be resolved and everything needs to be looking in a certain way, because you have other dynamics into this as well. It's definitely making sure that you can access the information from everywhere, but you also have the fact of data protection and making sure that you actually store and land that in certain countries and regions, because that's also driven from certain aspects. So it's still evolving a lot in that context, and what's the right mix of it, essentially, right? So is it something that I lose sleep over, that the conversion to ubiquitous cloud experience doesn't happen on a daily basis? No, it's not, because I think it's just we're on that path already. It will continue evolving, but there are many things that are still unresolved, I would say, in terms of where do you actually land and maintain your data sets over time, essentially.
And do you see a catalyst or a tipping point that will substantially accelerate adoption, or do you think we're on a smooth glide path?
I think it depends so much on your own environment as well, in terms of how you're driving your own business as an enterprise. We've gone through a divestiture process. We've been separating out of a large telco and changed names and all these kind of things. And during that process, we had to practice a little bit in the way of building up our own IT stack and sorting out our data sets and make sure that we had them in what for us is the right place, and make sure that people could actually access all of that data from wherever they are. So really, in that sense, being ubiquitous in the way. For us, it meant a split of about 60% is either cloud or software as a service based. 40% is more on-prem in that sense when we look at it, and that depends sometimes due to the fact that it's old systems and we can't really migrate them. It's not cost efficient to migrate them, and in some cases there is no option really to put them even into the cloud in that sense. But from a user perspective in our organization, they couldn't care less if it is in the cloud or if it's on the on-prem location. They just want to have access to the data sets wherever it is, right? So I think sometimes we make it a little bit more difficult than what it is as well. And is this like a unique happening? I don't think it is a unique happening. We're changing that. I think the entire industry, the users, the companies are moving that. But we haven't struck the balance between really what's in the cloud as we think about the cloud, what is really dedicated services that you have on your own locations, and that's going to change and float a little bit over time in terms of your needs and in terms of how you want to protect your data sets.
Understood. So it's evolving over time. So maybe let's look into the organizations a bit more. And Andrew, thinking from the Colt perspective, you already touched on how you've sort of reworked the enterprise team as a result. More broadly, what are the organizational or operating model changes you are making or you're foreseeing that you'll need to make to meet the evolving customer demands and be sort of cloud first?
Yeah, and I think just on that issue of urgency, I think it is, as Stefan said, the demand trend is there. We are serving it well. I think the urgency is we do have to change the way move away from the way we've always done things to better access that demand and capture value for us as an industry versus someone else taking that value. So I think I said from an enterprise space, we've tended to be moving our teams to be more focused up market. We've brought in technical client partners. We've brought in solution specialists. We've done more consultative training. We've invested in the service management resources. In the carrier space, we have stood up this new partnership team, brand new investment, VP function, significant set of resources, and then we are looking to proliferate our APIs into those carriers to enable them to work with us more seamlessly. And then we're making adjustments in our product set. We have a cloud product. We've now made that to Jim's point, multi-cloud. So a customer can access multiple clouds over the Colt backbone rather than needing different cloud connections. And then in the infrastructure space, we've done a lot of work. This is typical telco where it will be a one-size-fits-all approach. We've built dedicated service teams, sales engineering teams. We're changing our procurement processes to better fit the infrastructure provider. Little things like giving them access to an ILA or a data center out of hours. We don't have a procedure to do that. So we've changed the operating model in terms of a more dedicated team to enable them to reflect the needs of their customer base.
I can see, Jim, you're nodding. Are you thinking about the evolution of Equinix's operating model as the customer demand shift? How do you need to shift your organization and the way you work to ride with that?
Oh yeah. So we've made some pretty significant changes, recently. So, from the beginning of the company, we had one big product organization and that managed pretty much everything we did. We recently divided the company into basically two halves. So there's sort of the traditional data center side of the business with the cross connects and the physical readable assets that you think of when you think of the data center business. And then the other side of what we do is digital services. Now, digital services for us tends to be things like, curated VNFs as a service, bare metal as a service, timing as a service. And what we're trying to basically solve for is, when I go back to that point about sort of hybrid cloud, right, where an enterprise customer will tend to maintain portions of their infrastructure privately but interconnected to the public cloud. For our customer base, traditionally, that's been a sort of a capital intensive process, right? So normally, 65% of our revenues come from companies that are deployed with us across all three major regions, Asia, Europe, and the Americas. And normally what they'd have to do is to say, well, if I want to go into this incremental new metro, 4 racks only cost me, X a month, but I got to go populate it with $2 to $3 million worth of kit, right? To satisfy that private side of what they want to do. If I can do that using bare metal, if I can do that using our network edge service where, you don't actually have to deploy a POP even as a network operator. We've done some work with several operators where, they've already moved to white boxes. They've already taken the software journey and they're just using our hardware to stage their service on our infrastructure. The end user doesn't even know that that's happening and they don't need to know, but it makes it easier to consume the value of Equinix without actually having to be a colo customer per se.
Makes sense. Eric, from your side, are you looking at Zayo's operating model to say, look, the customer journeys are changing, requirements are changing, we're going to have to build towards this cloud-first future, which is very different to a traditional legacy telco. So to what extent are you looking at that and what that means for your operating model, your organization?
It's almost impossible to keep pace with the amount of change customers want. We were building a lot of internal Cloud Connect, Cloud Link type platforms. And then we looked and we saw, and brought up a few times what QoS was doing and realized we could spend 4 years and hundreds and thousands of developer hours, or we could find somebody who does this really well already and bring them into the stack. So we've kind of looked from an M&A perspective into what do we know we need that we are not going to get good at overnight and where there isn't a good partnership ecosystem. And then the second thing we've also acknowledged, and I think this is a real risk for all of us, is you have fewer and fewer network engineers coming out of universities ready to work. Very few kids dream, if they want to be a developer, of going right into the network, right? They want to be software developers. They want to design video games. Our customer base and most of our ecosystem, frankly, is getting diverse faster than we are. All of these talent shifts, we've tried to build programs to get ahead of that, because ultimately, the winner, whoever consolidates in the right way, probably has a good chance to win. But if they don't figure out the talent pipeline and they don't figure out how to keep up with the customer pace of change, I don't think there's going to be too many winners at the end that don't figure those things out.
You make a really good point on talent. And let me ask you first, Eric, and then we'll come down to a few of your peers here. How are you solving for that talent challenge, right? How are you attracting, developing, retaining that talent? So we did a study, it's published today with the GLF board. Board members identified they believe 30% or so of their workforce requires reskilling in the next 3 years, given where the industry is going. So sizable amount of upskilling, reskilling. So how do you look at it in Zayo? How do you take on that challenge to ensure that you're going to attract the best talent, but keep it relevant and keep it within your business?
I mean, that's a $1 billion question right there. The way that we've tended to look at that is, one, we want to invest in our local communities and try to build talent pipelines where we think that a density of employees working together makes a lot of sense. And so go into universities, try to build more diverse talent paths, get into things like programs like Greenhouse Scholars in the US, where you actually get into communities before they're even in university and try to have an impact on that portion of the talent pipeline. And then ultimately I think one of the good things of being able to operate in North America and Europe is we have the opportunity to move talent from one region to another, from one product to another, one team to another, and you can start to get people that really get a feel of the full ecosystem and can have an impact. I think we also have to be good stewards. We have to be willing to celebrate when we lose somebody good and they go to another great opportunity at one of our competitors, and we have to be willing to participate in that kind of cannibalistic ecosystem and celebrate that, as long as we keep developing people across the industry, we're happy as long as their careers are growing and as long as we participate in a good way.
And how do you look at this, Andrew, from Colt's perspective? Right? The upskilling, reskilling challenge is clear. You're already transitioning your operation in terms of how you do enterprise. How are you tackling this at Colt?
Yeah, we have explicit objectives and key results in terms of improving our diversity of our workforce, where we can measure that. In terms of bringing, and so that's a goal driven through every hiring manager, and in terms of how we are looking to bring new talent into the organization. I would echo what Eric said. I think what we are trying to do, we generally are quite successful in bringing new graduates in or apprenticeships. So we are focusing on apprenticeships as well, through engineering, through different departments. We put a lot of effort into then supporting employee networking groups or employee resource groups, which represent the different diversity and the different backgrounds of the talent that we've hired, to have them then talk back to future talent that would want to come and join us through social media channels, through webinars, through panel events, which they will stage, where we look to them to reach back out to new college, university graduates, other people they know who are entering the workplace, that we can have them promote our place as a good place to work.
And Jim, on your side, I mean, you're sitting quite quietly. Are people knocking down the door of the data center companies to say that this is where we're going to come, or are you facing the same challenges as the carriers here to attract talent, but then also continually develop it as the market moves around you?
Yep. No, I mean, talent is hard, I think, in, no matter what part of the industry you're in. And I know that, from our perspective, when people say the letters ESG, all of the attention is the E, and people tend to forget about the S part, and especially the G part, right? And so a lot of what you were talking about, we have very, very similar objectives. So for instance, in the last year, we've had a 13% increase in the number of female and people of color in executive leadership positions within the company. My RSU compensation at the end of every year is tied to actually hitting those goals as an executive in the company. So, we're incenting from the top down as far as that part goes. On the flip side, in addition to sort of the university programs that I think, we all sort of invest in and trying to get people, right out of school, because if you can catch them right when they're getting out of school, they don't get into that 2 to 3 years, change a job right away. That first job, they might stay 5, 6 years if you're lucky. And then we spend a lot of time on change of career. So we have programs specifically around, what happens when you leave the military, right? What happens when you stop competing in professional sports? What happens to your career? So making sure that people understand that, the data center industry is a great place for people who are making those decisions.
So we've got about 5 minutes left. So let me ask the same question to each of you. Stefan, I'll start with you and we'll work our way down to Eric, to yourself. Let's look forward the next 12 months. So what have you said so far? The ubiquitous cloud experience is coming. It's not yet a burning platform. We're going to need partnerships and make real partnerships work to deliver it. We're going to need to evolve how we think about our product, how we think about our go-to-market, our infrastructure, the ecosystem, to use a broad word, and we're going to have to attract and develop talent at the same time. So, in the next 12 months, you're back here, ITW May 2024. What is the one thing that you feel you need to have got right in your organization, right, to be on this journey, but then also step back as an industry, across your peers, what does the industry need to get right? So 2 things.
In our own organization, I would say that we're very much in a final stages of separation and from our previous owner into our own environment. For me, it's to convert now and really be fully standalone as an organization, execute extremely well over the next 12 months, both when it comes to our own internal processes, but also in the way that we're attracting and addressing customers and clients. And I think it's very execution oriented for me over the next 12 months in that context. If I look at the entire industry and over the next 12 months and seeing what the key challenges are, I think the industry at large right now, I think, is a little bit constrained from all the macro environments and the changes that we're seeing there. So I would probably say that we're going to see an even, I think that there will be a little bit of a softer market during the next 12 months in that context, and that will be a little bit interesting to follow, and therefore I think it's also very important to be very open-minded to the partnerships and to your own focus essentially over the next 12 months.
Brilliant, thank you, Stefan. So execution and then being open-minded to partnerships at the industry level. The cult perspective, Andrew.
I'm going to pick up on a couple of similar themes. I think internal right now, we want to see more value out of the partnership use case, and there's one that we're working on, which I hope we can pull off. It's really dealing with this hyperscale cloud experience where we're still seeing too many use cases where the data that resides on premise is too significant to be transported over a network, and you're seeing customers still use hard drives to move that data into a cloud environment. We have a proof of concept underway with a partner and a hyperscaler around 100 gig on demand. So I'd like to see that come to fruition. And then I think for the industry, I think it's this ability to partner better and have our systems and our capabilities interconnected through APIs, through software, have common platforms, common standards, so we can serve the overall market in a much more seamless fashion.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Jim.
Yeah, I'd have to, agree a lot with what Andrew's saying. I think, for us internally, we sort of look at it, if I go back to our sort of business unit designation, on the data center side of what we're doing, we feel like our customers continually want us to be closer and closer to where their users are. So for us, that's market expansion. And so we, are looking in various parts of the world. Where do we need to be that we're not today? Additional cities in India, other parts of Africa, other parts of Southeast Asia. On the digital services side, it's really around, that complete sort of cloud native change in the way that you go about building your systems. And so that investment sort of in that software mindset. And then on the external side, I really do think it's around, okay, once you have those things, then how do you get broad acceptance of those things across a set of partners so that you all benefit, right? The sum is greater than the individual contribution of any one company.
Brilliant, thank you. Eric, I'm going to come to you, but I'm not going to allow you to say partnerships again. We've had three votes for partnerships.
Good.
So what beyond partnerships at an industry level, and then what in Zayo?
So I agree. Definitely agree with the panelists. Internally for Zayo, we just have to relentlessly include our customers in this discussion as it develops. Yeah. Otherwise, what you have is you have a product team that delivers something 18 months later, and you had 18 months of conversations explaining why that actually isn't what you want. So just relentlessly include customers. And then as an industry, we need to be really good defining where we're going to focus, how we're going to focus there, and you'd rather be working with 50% fewer people in the industry. I'm avoiding the word partner, but do it twice as well.
Brilliant. We have come to time. So thank you, Stefan, Andrew, Jim, Eric, for an engaging conversation. Partnerships are obviously the way forward. Lots to do, relentless focus on the customer, reskilling and upskilling of teams, evolutions on the product portfolio. We're not there yet. We don't need to be. We have time, but we need to be relentlessly going after a ubiquitous cloud experience. So gentlemen, thank you very much. And I wish everybody a good ITW.